Welcome back. Our previous lesson was on how taxes on sellers shape equilibrium outcome. Today we'll be looking at how taxes on buyers shape equilibrium outcomes. So we define tax as mandatory contributions levied on corporations or individuals to finance government activities and public services. Now, taxes on buyers reduce the marginal benefit of buying a good or service. Hence, taxes on buyers cause a decrease in demand. So anything that affects the marginal benefit of a consumer is going to shift the demand curve to the left or to the right. So in this case, taxes on buyers will affect the marginal benefit that consumers receive from consuming a good. So it's going to cause a decrease in their demand of that good. Now let's consider a simple market for apples below. Before the government implemented any tax at all, equilibrium as shown by the intersection of our old demand curve and the supply curve occurs at point A. At this point, equilibrium price is 4. So equilibrium price is 4, shown on this curve. And the corresponding equilibrium quantity is 100 apples. So equilibrium quantity is 100. Now let's assume that for every apple bought, the government imposes a £1 tax, which means that consumers will have to pay an extra £1 as tax anytime they buy an apple. So this affects the marginal benefit that consumers gain from the consumption or the purchase of apple, and it's going to decrease their demand for apples. So this will shift the demand curve to the left. Now notice the demand curve shifts down by £1. The intersection of the demand curve here is 5.5. But demand curve shifts from the old demand curve to the new demand curve. The new intersection here is 4.5. This is because tax reduces the marginal benefit for buyers by £1 at any given quantity. So buyers will now be willing to buy apples if the before tax price is £1 per apple lower. So equilibrium occurs where the new demand curve will meet the existing supply curve. Now this our new demand curve intersect with the supply curve at point B. At this point, our new equilibrium price will be 3.5. 3.5. And our new equilibrium quantity will be 90. So the quantity of apples bought falls from 100 to 90. Now what we have to know here is that the price buyers pay after the tax rises, and the price sellers receive after the tax also falls. Now let's show this on the curve. Before the tax was implemented, both parties, the equilibrium price was 4. So producers were receiving £4 per apple, and buyers were paying £4 per apple. But the tax on the consumer shifts the demand curve to the left by exactly the £1 tax margin. Now the new equilibrium price is 3.5, and this is going to be the price that producers will receive. So the price that producers receive falls from 4 to 3.5, and the difference is 0.5. Now, to explain this in very simple terms, it's like when you go into the market, you pay 3.5 for an apple, but the government requires you to pay an extra £1 for each apple bought. So the 3.5 that producers receive is not the only payment that consumers make. They have to make an extra £1 tax payment to the government, this is going to increase the price that consumers pay by £1. So 3.5 plus 1 will increase the price that consumers pay to 4.5. So the difference between the new price and the old price that consumers are paying is also 0.5. Their price increases from 4 to 4.5. So the price buyers pay after the tax rises by 0.5, which is from 4 to 4.5. And the price that sellers receive after the tax also falls by 0.5, which is 4 to 3.5. Now, there are a few things to note about this curve. The first thing is the tax leads to a decline in quantity sold. So we can see that quantity sold reduces from 100 apples to 90 apples. The second thing to note about this curve is that the tax increases the price that buyers pay, but decreases the price that producers receive. So the price that buyers pay increases from 4 to 4.5, but the price that producers receive reduces from 4 to 3.5. Both buyers and sellers share the economic burdens of the tax on buyers. So even though the tax was imposed on buyers, both the sellers and the buyers share the economic burden. Now, we talked in our previous class about the difference between the statutory burden and the economic burden. So there's a distinction between these two. There's a distinction between who is assigned the tax payment and then who bears the burden. So the statutory burden is just describing the burden of being assigned by the government the responsibility of sending a tax payment. And then the economic burden describes the burden created by the change in after-tax prices faced by buyers and sellers as a result of the tax. Now, in this example, the statutory burden is entirely on buyers, which means the government imposed the tax on buyers and requires buyers to make payment to him in the form of taxes. However, buyers and sellers each bear some of the economic burden. And also, in this example, buyers and sellers share the burden equally. So buyers pay an extra £0.5 because of the tax, and producers lose £0.5 because of the tax. So the £1 tax placed on buyers has been shared equally between producers and sellers, which is 0.5 and 0.5. But as I said in our previous class, this is not always the case. It could be that one party can pay more than the other party, depending on the elasticity of demand and supply. And that is what we'll be looking at in our next lesson. So this is all we have for how taxes on buyers shape equilibrium outcome. Our next lesson will be on the economic burden of taxes and how it is distributed between buyers and sellers. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.